Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Lannon. I'm the principal of Lannon Legal PLLC. We're a law firm based in Washington, D.C. with a national practice, much of it focused on transactions in the hotel and lodging industry. And today I am giving the second of a series of presentations on hotel management agreements. The first presentation was on the parties to HMAs, the owner and the management company. Today's presentation is going to be on the interests of those parties, which align in some ways and in some ways are very different from one another. Third presentation will be on specific legal relationships between the parties that are advantageous to one or another or both parties in regard to the interests that we're going to discuss today. So as I mentioned in the first presentation, there are two parties to any hotel management agreement, the hotel owner and the hotel management company. These two parties do operate in the same industry, but they have very different business models and very different interests. The owner is primarily a real estate investor. The owner, as I mentioned during the first presentation, owns the hotel, all the real estate, the dirt under the hotel, usually unless there's a ground lease, the fixtures on top of that dirt as well, which means on the building and all the buildings. The owner does own everything in the hotel as well, all the personal property as well as intangibles, such as any intellectual property associated with the hotel, unless it's the brand's intellectual property. We'll get into that later. Accounts receivable, goodwill, all of that is owned by the owner. But the owner's primary role in the world is as a real estate investor. The owner takes the most risk in the relationship. The debts and the liabilities of the hotel are ultimately the debts and liabilities of the owner. If there's not enough money to operate the hotel from its revenue, it's the owner that's responsible to infuse working capital. All of the expenses of operating the hotel, including the salary of all the employees of the management company, are borne ultimately by the owner. They're taken out of the hotel's revenues, and if there's not enough money there, then the owner's got to kick in some of its own cash to pay that. So the owner has all that risk. The owner also has its commitments to the lenders. If there's a lender involved in the transaction and there's a mortgage, a monthly mortgage fee, the owner has to make that mortgage payment every month. As I mentioned, the hotel is responsible for all the operating costs, all the liabilities. If there's some significant liability in the hotel, if there's an outbreak in the kitchen of some disease and a bunch of guests get sick, that's ultimately a liability that's borne by the owner, unless there's gross negligence at a high level on the part of the management company. So as you can see from my graphic here, it's the owner that does the heavy lifting in the relationship. On the flip side, because of that, the owner has the greatest potential for profit. If a hotel is doing very well, yes, the management company will do better, but the owner will do substantially better. And the owner draws the vast majority of the profit from a profitable hotel. The management company is in the hotel industry, yes, but has a very different business model than the owner. The management company is in the business of hospitality and providing services. The management company is typically not a real estate investor. We have in the industry now what's known as the asset-light model. Decades ago, it was common for management companies to own hotels and also own the brands under which the hotels operated. And so if you went to a hotel, you were doing business with one entity as opposed to nowadays typically three for most hotels. The hotel owner, the hotel management company, and then a third-party brand. Nowadays, the brand companies, most of them, have gotten out of the real estate business, and independent non-branded management companies have also gotten out of the real estate business. The management company, as I said, is in the business of providing services. It employs all of the hotel employees. In the United States, that's everybody from the general manager, who's the captain of the ship, all the way down to the lowest level employee in the hotel. They are all employees of the hotel management company. Now, their salaries and other payroll expenses are operating expenses of the hotel. and ultimately the owner is responsible for those. They are paid out of the revenues of the hotel, and if those revenues are not sufficient, the owner has to infuse some working capital to do it. But their employer, in the United States at least, is the hotel management company and not the owner. For the most part, in the U.S., there are some exceptions. Outside of the U.S., in a number of countries, what you'll see is the owner will employ most of the employees, but the management company may employ the most senior employees in the hotel, the general manager and assistant general managers and such. But that typically isn't the model here. The management company makes its money from hotel management agreements through fees. And there are three types of fees. There's the base fee. The base fee is a percentage of the hotel's total revenue or gross revenue, usually around 3, maybe 4% off the top. Also, in some properties, not all, there are what are called incentive management fees. The incentive management fee is a percentage of any profit that the hotel generates. So if the place is profitable, sometimes it has to not just be profitable, but profitable above and beyond a certain threshold of profit that the owner gets to keep for itself. And then if it exceeds that, what's called owner's preferred return or owner's priority, then to the extent that it exceeds that, the management company gets to share in that profit by, maybe 10, 15, 20%. So that's the second type of fees. The third type of fee is above property service fees, sometimes called system service fees. And these are fees that the management company collects for services that it renders to multiple owners that one of those owners may have opted into. So they're often offered on an a la carte basis. So sometimes it's mandatory to participate in them all. Sometimes I've seen there's a flat system services fee that covers a wide array of system services, and sometimes it's purely a la carte. If you want revenue management services above property, you pay something for that. If you want above property accounting services, which is very common, you may pay an extra fee for that. Other above property services include marketing and procurement. And it's usually provided not at the hotel, but at the corporate headquarters of the management company or at a regional office, and then billed to the individual properties. So that's how the management company makes its money. I don't want to leave the impression that the management company doesn't pay for anything itself. The management company does cover costs of corporate oversight and regional oversight. It has to pay the salaries of its executives and their support staff. Management companies invest a tremendous amount in training their employees to be effective hotel managers. If a management company is affiliated with the brand, obviously brands spend huge amounts of money in enhancing their brands to make them effective brands. Are the owner and management company's interests aligned? Or do they compete with one another in some sense? The answer is yes and no. They're aligned in some way, and in some way they are disaligned. How are they aligned? Well, the management fee structure. So the base management fee, let's say it's 3% of gross revenues of the hotel. If the hotel is doing better, there are going to be more revenues, and the management company is going to go home with higher management fees. So in that respect, they are aligned. The incentive management fees, those are most certainly aligned because they're the management company. Well, it has to be profitable for them to get an incentive management fee. And the more profitable it is, the higher the hotel management company's fees. So those are two ways in which they are aligned. But in some ways, they're not aligned. As I mentioned earlier, the owner's the heavy lifter in the relationship. It reminds me of the old adage of a bacon and eggs breakfast. The chicken made a contribution to the breakfast, but the pig was really invested in the enterprise. And so it is with hotels. The owner puts everything on the line in a hotel. The management company, even if the hotel's not profitable, chances are the management company is going to make some money. Remember, all of its operating costs, all the hotel's operating costs are covered by the hotel, and the management company is very careful to ensure that there's enough money to make payroll every 2 weeks so that its employees are paid. And if that money's not there, there are remedies under which the management company can quickly withdraw. If there's not enough working capital, the management company has a right to demand that the owner provide it. And even if it's not profitable at all and the management company doesn't make any incentive management fees, it will make some base management fee. On the other hand, the owner, if it's not profitable, the owner could ultimately face bankruptcy. So there's a lot more risk in a hotel investment for the owner than there is for the management company. As I said, there's a lot more upside if the place does well. So in that respect, their interests are very different. I've mentioned a couple of times the owner's working capital requirement. Another item that I'll mention here is a broad right of indemnification of the management company. Most hotel management agreements have a very strongly worded indemnification clause in favor of the management company, in which it says that the management company will be indemnified and held harmless by the owner from and against any liability arising out of or related to the management company's operation of the hotel, with only a few narrow exceptions. And those are typically, they require fraud or willful misconduct or gross negligence, not simple negligence, gross negligence by the management company, and not just by the management company, by anybody working with the management company, but it's only that kind of conduct by senior employees of the hotel management company, corporate executives, regional overseers, sometimes the general manager of the hotel, sometimes not the general manager of the hotel, depending on what the parties negotiate. But if there's a housekeeper who steals from guests, for example, that's not going to be grounds for indemnification by the management company of the owner. That's going to be the owner's loss unless the owner can prove that the person was grossly negligently hired, or that the management company was aware of what was going on and didn't step in. The senior managers didn't step in soon enough to stop it. So that's another way in which the owner takes significantly more risk.
I don't want to leave you with the impression that the management company takes no risk at the property level. It does, and its risk is associated with its employees. And that's what really the biggest resource the management company brings to the table is its people. And it makes commitments to those people and investments in those people. And the first risk related to those people that it takes is payroll risk. It has to know that there's going to be enough money in the operating account to pay those people. Because if it doesn't, it's the management company that's on the line. Not only the management company itself, but its executives. There's personal liability under statutes to them if they don't complete those payroll expenses. And if the place goes belly up, there's got to be at least enough cash to do that. And as I've mentioned multiple times in this presentation, they have a contractual right to demand a working capital call. But what if the owner doesn't come through? That's why it's important for a management company to ensure not only that the contract provides for there to be at least enough to make the next payroll, probably more in the operating account at any given time, but from day to day in actually operating the place, they've got to make sure that they've got at least that much money in there, and that if it ever dips below that threshold, that they can get out and minimize their liability out of their own pocket for having to pay these people for work that they've done. And then even if the second piece that I want to mention is that even if they make the payroll and the place goes belly up, yeah, sure, they've paid their people. They don't have the statutory liability to their officers for not having paid payroll, salaries, and withholding taxes and such. But there's going to be significant administrative expense to them in reassigning folks, and of course having to lay people off, and there are expenses associated with that. So those are risks of the management company at the property level. Nevertheless, my primary point stands, which is that the owner carries the bulk of the business risk at the property level in this venture, and in that respect, the interests are they're very different from one another. Now, we've talked about how the risks are not aligned. Are there any instances in which there are actually competing interests, in which in the enterprise of the hotel, the management company's interest directly competes with that of the owner? And sometimes yes. For the most part, no, but sometimes yes. And I can think of two instances in which they do. We've mentioned that the management company is responsible for the expenses of above property oversight, for its the salaries of its corporate personnel and other expenses associated with making sure that the general manager and all the people who are working for the general manager are doing things right. Sometimes an owner might feel that the management company is just not giving enough executive attention to a property. I'm dealing with a case right now. It's a piece of litigation in which I am representing the owner of a couple properties, and the owner feels that the management company didn't pay enough attention to the operation of the property, and if they had stepped in and just focused more on supervising the on-property management staff, that the places would have operated much more successfully. And in doing that, the expense of doing that comes out of the management company's pocket. So if they hold back on that expense, it's to their benefit and to the detriment of the owner. If they do enough, of course, it's going to be more of an investment by the management company. The more common complaint that one hears in the industry is from owners, and it's particular to brand management companies. There is a perception that brand management companies are too quick to spend owners' money on investing in the hotels. And of course, it makes some very nice hotels. But many owners would complain that it doesn't contribute to their bottom line. It makes the places less profitable, these owners would complain, than they would be if less money was spent. And the complaint is that making these fabulous hotels does contribute to the image of the brand, but isn't what's best for the bottom line of the hotel. So I'll give a few examples. One has to do with the system service fees that I mentioned earlier. In an earlier slide, I mentioned that with respect to the base management fees and the incentive management fees, not so with the above property service fees. And there is a perception in the industry that brand management companies charge way more of those than non-branded management companies, and that some owners would say too many of those, to the detriment of the bottom line of the hotel. Then another example would just be spending money on refreshing soft goods in the hotel. That's all the fabrics, replacing those, replacing fixtures, furniture, and equipment, maybe hiring of employees. Some owners might complain, well, they hired too many employees, and all these things make the place fabulous, but don't necessarily contribute to the bottom line. And owners would say, you're investing too much of my money in enhancing the image of your brand, but not to pursuing my bottom line. That's the complaint. And the general perception is that, at least for smaller hotels, your select service hotels and smaller full service hotels, it's more efficient for an owner to hire a independent operator to operate the hotel with a franchise agreement with the brand, as opposed to hiring the brand itself to operate the hotel. That's it for this presentation. In the next presentation, I'm going to discuss 4 different types of legal relationships, 3 alternate relationships, and a fourth that can overlay any of the 3 that affect the party's ability to pursue the interests that I discussed in this presentation. Thanks for your time today.